Hi, I'm Chris Spizak, and this is the Words You Should Know podcast. A few stolen minutes out of your day to talk words and communication, because our daily lives are surrounded by the evolution of and the influence of words. Forget the grammar police. There is so much more to this conversation. And as a reminder, a free download of fiction editing cheat sheets, family story writing references, and business communication tips are available on my website, getagriponyourgrammar.com. Welcome to episode number 37, where we'll dive into the question that lingers on so many minds. Is the proverbial rule of thumb connected with beating one's wife? Yes, you heard me right. The rumor's there. It lingers in college classrooms and in magazine articles. Discussions question its validity. Some argue it couldn't possibly be true. Or could it? Stay tuned for more on that. And let's see if we can put our finger on the truth. Too much? Maybe. But first, here's the latest in word, language, and writing news. So you've probably gathered that I find technology fascinating, and you simply can't talk about contemporary language news without discussing this area of research and innovation. Because when we're looking at the way we speak, how our language will be preserved, and where its future is going, technology is a big piece of the conversation. Of course, I also have this theory that the linguists of the future, or maybe the casually interested in etymology, years from now, will have questions about the linkages with former President Donald Trump with idioms such as playing the Trump card and trumped-up charges. No matter what direction you lean politically, you've got to admit someone is going to be confused about this in the future, but that's beside the point of things. The two news stories I want to touch upon today are these. First, reading isn't just a way to cram facts into your brain. It's actually a way to rewire how your brain works in general. And I'm not talking about hacking fruit flies like last episode. Reading, by itself, strengthens, and I quote, your ability to imagine alternative paths, remember details, picture detailed scenes, and think through complex problems. In short, reading makes you not just more knowledgeable, but also functionally smarter. So yeah, get your word on, folks. Dive into those stories. You'll be all the better for it. Links to specific research points are available in this episode's show notes. And speaking of all the better for it, maybe this works as a segue, I'm not quite sure. Are robots getting all the better at storytelling? Okay, I'm not talking about Rosie from the Jetsons sitting down with the stylus on her screen of choice, but artificial intelligence is being put to the test, perhaps for the first time ever, when it comes to playwriting. AI script writing has had its own tests. But on Friday, February 26, 2021, the Czech Center London, in partnership with Prague's Svanda Theatre, will witness the first ever presentation of a show written entirely by artificial intelligence, specifically GPT-2 trained extensively on existing theater scripts. There are so many extra notes to highlight here. Yes, this is GPT-2, an earlier version than the GPT-3 technology that's been all over the linguistic and or technological news feeds for the past year. But my favorite part of this is that the show is also to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the Czech playwright Karl Kopek's play R.U.R., or Rozum's Universal Robots, which originated the term robot. You heard that right. If you didn't know, the English word robot comes from the Czech language, a word meaning forced labor, or sometimes translated to work hard. And on the 100th anniversary of a play about robots written by a man, we have a play about men written by robots. What will the reviews say? Stay tuned for that. But today's episode isn't about brain science or artificial intelligence. It might be about a misogynistic legal system. Or it might be about more fake language news. Maybe a bit of both, actually. Have you ever wondered about the origin of the phrase rule of thumb? As in the rule of thumb for buying a house, or semicolon usage. Which is harder? You decide. The phrase rule of thumb, as we know, means a general principle regarded as correct or understood, or the understood best procedure of things. But what's the deal with this thumb? Whose thumb are we talking about, and why is it the guide for our decisions? The problem here is in the connection with the rule of thumb idiom and an 18th century British judge named Francis Bueller. Bueller, nope, much different from Ferris Bueller. This one was dubbed Judge Thumb because he was rumored to have said that a man could beat his wife in punishment for misdeeds, as long as the stick with which she was beaten was no thicker than his thumb. So yeah, there's that. Wow. The truth of Judge Thumb's reputation is a bit muddled in that it was largely built by famous political cartoonist James Gilray, so caricaturists might not be the best source of evidence on the matter, but the source material is still pretty bad. But then there are some pretty terrible legal arguments on the US side of the Atlantic as well. When discussing the rule of thumb, some point to the 1868 North Carolina legal battle of State versus Rhodes, where the judgment was decided, and I quote, "His Honor was of the opinion that the defendant had the right to whip his wife with a switch no longer than his thumb." Thicker, longer, there are so many issues here. Now, this case ultimately went to the state Supreme Court, but they dismissed it on the basis that the involved husband had not actually harmed the wife substantially. So, thus, this court case allowed for beating one's wife in North Carolina in the 1860s as long as there was no major or permanent damage. Right. Yikes. It all seems a bit damning when all of these historical cases start getting involved. But when we get down to it, the exact phrase rule of thumb was never used in these cases. When the phrase rule of thumb was used historically, it never actually held any meaning that seemed to be connected with violence, punishment, or anything similar. The rule of thumb phrase was much more likely connected to the idea of the simple usefulness of the thumb in so many situations. For example, brewers tested the temperature of a batch of beer by dipping their thumb in the brew. Thumbs could be used for estimating measurements of endless varieties, alignment, distance, rough inches, and beyond. The Oxford English Dictionary agrees with this background story, noting that for over 300 years, the phrase has been used to refer to measurements based on experience rather than exact science. In fact, the earliest known use of rule of thumb in print appears to be a sermon printed in the publication Heaven Upon Earth in 1658. It read, "Many professed Christians are like to foolish builders, who build by guess and by rule of thumb, and not by square and rule." So what does this sound like to you? Not domestic violence, surely. Now, if we want to have the conversation about the accepted brutality of marital relations in past eras, brutality often accepted by various governments, there's a discussion we can have. But in the end of all this, the rule of thumb likely shouldn't be a part of that conversation. So that's one positive, I suppose. Were you getting nervous? I know I was when I was doing this research. I was getting nervous. Etymology, folks. Suspense, tension, horror, hope, panic, relief. Who needs to read or write thrillers to feel that rush of adrenaline? Kidding. Kind of. Turning to our language challenge. Since we're talking about the rule of thumb today and lots of legalities, do you know the difference between forbid, forbode, and verboten? For example, which one means simply prohibited, and which one is connected with the Old English word for prophecy? The answers, as always, can be found on my website at getagriponyourgrammar.com. And to close with my personal update, if you're a creative like myself, sometimes you find yourself feeling drawn towards a new project here, a new project there, so many ideas, so little time. Or other times maybe you feel the opposite, a desire to create but no clue what to create. I've mentioned that I've been in the midst of a virtual cross-country book tour with my third book, The Family Story Workbook, in partnership with indie bookstores. Quick shout out to Book No Further in Roanoke, Virginia, where I'm having an event this week. Shout out to Changing Hands Bookstore in Phoenix and Tempe, Arizona, who hosted me last week. And a final huzzah to the Boulder Bookstore in Colorado, who invited me to be a part of their author Q&A video series. Now talk about creativity and action in these strange times. Indie bookstores rock. I've said it before and I'll say it again. But back to that idea of new projects. I have had something niggling in the back of my mind for nearly a year now that I have not allowed myself the time to play with. But I'm officially allowing myself the time to play. That's all I'm sharing for now. I know, what a tease, but a cool, new, creative, research-heavy project might be underway, and I will keep you updated as it develops further. But as we wrap up today's episode, I'll leave you with this. Spending in-depth time with words and stories can change your brain chemistry for the better. On the stage this week, human-made artificial intelligence is attempting to capture what it's like to be human. History is full of cruelty and brutality, but at least not all language origin stories are. Sometimes they're just full of brewers sticking their thumbs in things. There could be worse things, I suppose. Is that its own rule of thumb? Probably not. But at least now you know what you're talking about. Are you curious or confused about the words you use every day? For more information on language news, trivia, tips, and explorations, I invite you to sign up for my monthly newsletter at getagriponyourgrammar.com. That's also a great place for free downloads and to learn more about my books, Get a Grip on Your Grammar, the Novel Editing Workbook, and the Family Story Workbook. Thank you so much to those of you who have taken the time to either review my books or to review or rate this podcast. And if you haven't, why don't you head over to wherever you listen and do so? I'm so grateful for it, and it really does make a difference in the visibility of this show. And as always, I invite you to share your latest writing or language updates or insights with me. I love hearing from you. Until next time, words, language, communication. We've got this.